Greetings, Berkshire County. Thank you for joining us on iBerkshiresTV. Today we are joined by a very special guest, our State Senator Adam Hinds, direct from Pittsfield. Adam, how are you?
I'm good. When you said very special, I was starting to wonder who you were having on.
We thought it was the mayor, but it turned out to be you. But we'll live. But it is good to see you. Everything is good in your end.
Yeah, it's really nonstop for the last 2 months, as it is for just about a lot of folks. And if it's not the healthcare situation, it's the economic impacts or the education impacts. And so it's scary times. But as we've all seen, it brings out sometimes the best in people too. And we realize, I was on a Zoom call with a class of 7th graders, and they were doing a regular check-in, and I told them that my parents are both getting up there, and so we decided that we're not going to be, my sister and I are not going to be in regular contact with them. And so one result of this is I'm going to make sure I'm hugging my parents more often after we're all done.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. They're out in Eastern Mass and Southern New Hampshire, and it's tough because we all get lonely. Those are certainly the social aspects of it. But as far as finances go, it's a slap in the face. There's nothing we can do. This is all happening. You had mentioned you had an op-ed in the Globe, I think Monday or Tuesday. They're talking about $5 billion, $4 billion, $6 billion shortfall, which of course is going to trickle down to us all. Mayor Bernard at Tuesday night's North Adams City Council meeting mentioned the 2008 recession last night in Adams. Jay Green certainly mentioned 2008 and what cities and towns went through. First of all, talk about the shortfall, but you have a pretty unique perspective on how we might be able to come out of this. And it's all in your op-ed. You can search Boston Globe Adam Hinds, and I'm sure you'll find the op-ed. But why don't you get into a little bit now?
Sure. I mean, so you put your finger on the big challenges. We basically had, I'm the chair of revenue, and so we had 9 experts come in 2 weeks ago now, and they essentially all agreed we're going to be short probably 10% of our budget, so probably $5 billion, and so that's a pretty big gap to cover right from the outstart. We have a rainy day fund that's the highest it's ever been in Massachusetts of $3.5 billion, which starts to sound like, okay, interesting, we're closing that gap. But the reality is we don't know how long the recession is going to be, and therefore we probably don't want to spend it all at once. And so the other variable is we don't know how much we're getting from the federal government. The op-ed was about essentially saying, look, if this summer we're going to be trying to open up the economy, let's say June, then that's exactly the time when the towns and the state itself are going to be under pressure to constrict and to contract because of this shortfall. So it really highlights the importance of that federal money. And so you're right that we've then, it kind of leaves this third category of what you do, and that's the budget. The treasurer came on when we had that hearing and said the largest amount or source of unrestricted funds to towns and cities has been the lottery, and that's down 30% since all this started. Keno's down 50% in their revenue. It's just it just kind of shows you the hole that we're going to be digging ourselves out of. After the recession, so fiscal year 10, we saw that essentially local aid was down around 20%, I believe, and a lot of people are saying this could be even worse than that. But we are getting more in federal aid than we had during that period, and so it's I think we'll definitely put a fence around certain things like school aid and education support, other safety nets. But otherwise, you're right. We're in for a long haul ahead.
There's definitely going to be some belt tightening. And I know recently there was a $1.5 billion investment in the state schools just to ensure everybody that is still going to happen. That has essentially happened.
Yeah, so it was going to happen over 7 years, and so that's a great example of we all identify a big problem we had and find a way to fix it, and then this comes along and kind of smacks us in the face. And so I think that's probably in the category of things that we want to try to hold dear to and make sure our kids are not seeing any more of a negative impact of this than they already are. And so, but I wonder if that means that maybe that path to 1.5 billion that would have been 7 years. See how we get there, I guess, is one question we have to work through.
And one of the big, you mentioned one of the big advantages the federal government has. They can deficit spend, they can borrow, they haven't had a balanced budget in forever. Little old Adams here, big old Pittsfield, big old Boston, they have to balance. The state has to balance, the federal government does not. We have a good example here right on Route 8 in Adams from McDonald's up to the overpass going over the Ishwilta-Cook. We have an almost $9 million road project going on.
Right.
That's already in the pipeline. It's going to happen. It's monies that have already been spent, or at least planned on being spent. That's a great indication of how the federal government could help. We all know roads are a mess. We all know public transportation could use a huge boost. A way the federal government could help boost the economy by increasing aid to states and cities and towns.
Yeah, and I like your emphasis on the infrastructure. That's one thing I pointed to, is that, let's say that there are some weird dynamics in how this recession happened. First of all, typically in the Great Recession, you kind of saw this decrease in demand because of starting of the housing markets, but it spread, and so it's a bit of an onward problem. This one, literally overnight, we had an economy that was humming along. A lot of people, particularly in the Berkshires, were getting ready for a pretty strong summer season, whether it's construction or tourism, and then all of a sudden the bottoms just kind of pulled out. And so on the in terms of for what the recovery looks like, we keep talking about, is it going to be, if let's say the recession was an L, we went down and then it kind of took a long time. Could this be a V because we had a pretty good economy beforehand, and now we turned the light switch off? The problem is, on the one hand, we're going to see pent up demand, and a lot of people want to get out and start spending on things that they didn't, those haircuts that you and I haven't been getting. But on the other hand, it's going to be, we're already hearing, crane, and the number of jobs that are going to be there is going to be smaller. And so it is going to be a different economy on the other side of this. All of that points to, more of a need for why we want to have these sustained investments coming. And as you point out, the federal government is basically the big game in town. And so doing it either through investments to our towns and our states, or and an investment finally in an infrastructure bill that we've been talking about for a long time now, and especially in transportation. I mean, here we are, we've been talking about the critical need for connecting the Berkshires and Western Mass with the entire Commonwealth via rail. That's just one major investment that would bring jobs immediately and have a long-term economic boost to the region.
And I think on the type of projects that you brought up in your op-ed, you're talking about jobs that are the lifeblood of the economy. If you invest in education, you're talking about teachers and teachers' aides. If you invest in construction, you're talking about construction workers, talking about police. It really affects every level of the economy. You also need lawyers to draw up contracts, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very far-reaching. You look outside and you see paving a road and it employs 20 construction guys. It goes far deeper than that when you really get into it. And I think it's a great idea. Now is trying to get Washington to listen and give everybody that equal treatment that is so tough to come by.
Yeah, that's right. And you put your finger on it. It's because one of the typical reactions here is, as you say, you've got to tighten the belt and maybe even cut some jobs in the state and local governments. And boy, I tell you, at a time when we're trying to save jobs and we're trying to make sure that folks have money in their pockets, it feels counterintuitive that that's when you start to lay off people. And so, finding the money to keep everyone whole is I think it's certainly my priority in the first round. I pointed out that when you combine state and local government, we're actually the biggest employer statewide. And so if you, again, pull the rug out from underneath the biggest employer statewide, it's not exactly the recipe for a strong recovery. And so, yeah, I think you're right on that.
Well, let's talk positives now, because the economy and the world is eventually going to open again. We've seen a million plans floated, whether it's going from 10 people to 25 people to 50 people for gatherings, whether we've actually seen, I think some states already do it, say you can open your restaurant, you can have half as many people in it. What is your role? What is the legislature's role? How informed does Governor Baker keep all of you?
Yeah.
What are his decisions being based on? What are your decisions being based on as far as how quickly that happens and what it looks like?
Well, it's interesting you're bringing this up. We just started 2 days ago with the governor's economic reopening advisory board, and I'm representing the Senate on that as basically an observer, probably membership to come. The challenge here is, and you probably maybe heard when he announced this, he said on May 18th, we're going to have a plan for a phased reopening. And so the challenge becomes, okay, are you looking at industries where you can socially distance? I think the thinking of it is shifting from essential and non-essential to what are the workplaces, even within an industry, where you can achieve certain criteria, whether it's cleanliness or distancing and the like, and making sure there's PPE in those early days. And so that's why you kind of hear a difference in opinion on things like construction, whereas, if you're doing construction in an outdoor environment versus in a skyscraper in downtown Boston, it's a very different scenario. And so I think that's probably a good shift is, okay, what can we do? Do you have a job that's a lot of your employees can do it remotely, etc. Then maybe those would be in the early days. And then of course, the size and its impact. So I would say that you're right that everyone's keenly aware that we don't want to open up and then have another surge medically on our health institutions. And so being very clear, there's a lot of conversations about what different countries have done. China basically waited until the cases were getting pretty darn close to statistical zero. Spain opened up much earlier and then had to shut down again. And so you can kind of see that we have some examples now. The other piece that I'm trying to introduce to it is the Berkshires are different from Boston in a lot of ways. And but first and foremost, the data basically says we peaked at the start of April. Over in the Valley, Franklin, Hampshire, Hamden seem to have peaked around Easter, and Boston is maybe right now coming off of a peak. And so that's like nearly a month's difference. And so, we've seen upstate New York, or the Governor Cuomo is talking about other regions, certain regions can open up earlier. Personally, I'd like to see that here, and especially as we're trying to get into our summer season and kind of be very clear about these other impacts on mental health and others that if we can achieve it here, then let's start to do that because we're in a different scenario. So all of that feeds into the considerations and where we'll end up. But for the time being, we're in lockdown for another 3 weeks.
Yeah, I know Jay Green last night, the town administrator here in Adams. The most frustrating thing is you and I could talk about this for the next 3 hours, and I believe that we actually could. But you just don't know. You could make plans and everything is looking good and you get that next spike and you just don't know. Berkshire County, of course, is so unique. A lot of people say that we haven't really recovered from the 2008 debacle. We've recovered some, but we haven't seen the big housing price rebound or anything like that. So treating Berkshire County and on the opposite end of the state, the Cape, sort of go together. The older population. It's not exactly a robust job market, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
This is the greatest challenge, certainly of our lifetime. It seems to be both financially, health-wise, socially. 9/11 was certainly unbelievably unique and awful, but this is a whole different scenario. This is so long-lasting. It happened acutely, and I think it's not going to recover that way, perhaps. Give me your best piece of news that you've heard within your circles.
Wow. Geez, good news here, huh? I will say this, and I'm not just kind of making a throwaway story here, but there've been a lot of schools, right, that are challenged with how do we have remote access and remote learning in a situation where we may not have internet in every town and every kid may not have a laptop or a tablet. And honestly, working with school superintendents and principals and IT directors to really say, okay, what are we going to do to make sure that every student has opportunity and make sure that equity is achieved? I've seen story after story with just incredibly creative folks in the schools saying, we're going to put everything on the line to make sure everyone has access to technology. And so it's really been heartwarming to see that maybe a silver lining is we do see investments accelerated in areas where we hadn't seen them to the extent that we needed. And so there is a bit of that happening. And so that's great news to be held up for sure.
If there's a place where good news is going to come from, I'm glad that your story has to do with schools and kids. And we could go on and on. This interview could be 2 hours. And I think at the end of it, we probably still wouldn't know a lot. It's impossible to know right now. But I want to give you an open invitation. If you've got news to spread, you can call up Tammy, the head honcho over there at iBerkshires. And anything you want to get on the air, let us know, and you'd be more than welcome. And I just wish you good health and the whole family and everything.
Well, same to you, and thanks for finding ways to continue to do your job and keep your voice in the community. We need it.
Absolutely. Adam, thank you very much, and I hope we can see you soon.
Definitely. Let's do it.
Thank
Take
you.
care.